Hi there and welcome back to the Fuse Show. I'm your host, David Tran, and I'm also a co-founder of Xfusion.io. Today I'm joined by Igor Susmelj of Lightly.ai, a company that's trying to tackle novel data curation. And before that, Igor has worked on an innovation lab on this Swiss stock exchange as a software engineer and has a background in computer vision and machine learning with several successful publications. Thanks for joining us on the show, Igor.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
So what led you to want to build Lightly?
Basically, when moving from academia to industry, I faced several challenges. When we do machine learning in academia, we have very well-curated data sets, academic data sets, where lots of manpower has already been invested in making sure it's good for benchmarking. Mm-hmm. And basically, when going to industry, I struggled building my own data sets, collecting data, and then labeling it. You have to spend a lot of time. Kind of labeling is this task of drawing bounding boxes around objects, mm-hmm. Like cars or pedestrians. And when doing that, I just ask myself the question, does it even make sense to label the data I'm just looking at, or are some of the images more valuable than others? And there was nothing around there. So we decided, hey, let's have a look at this problem and see whether we can solve it, also for others.
So your idea was to use AI to define those bounding boxes. Am I hearing that right? Or to identify the importance of within a data set?
It's not on the bounding box level. What we do is more on the image level. So we try to help companies figure out what kind of images they should actually work with.
I see.
When you talk to industry experts, we usually hear numbers of that they use 1% or less of the data they have. And when we ask them on how they pick this 1%, they would just do it randomly, or they wouldn't know how to do it, so they would use any method they find.
And what is the MVP that you first started building with to help them narrow down the problem?
Yes, so we built a very, very rough prototype, wrapped it in we had to wrap it in a Docker container, because we just thought like the customer, it was a car company, car manufacturer from Germany, actually a big one. And we actually thought they could just quickly upload their data sets and we would just curate it on our end. But it turned out that they were already working with almost a petabyte, and we cannot just quickly upload it to our platform. So we had to wrap our solution in a Docker container, ship it to them, and they were able to run a few experiments. And it was pretty exciting to see that it worked very well because they didn't have anything before.
How'd you come across this car manufacturer? Like, how'd you plant the seed in their brains to consider the solution?
Yes, so it was basically me and my co-founder. I was more focusing on the MVP back then, and he was trying to reach out to different companies. So he was really cold mailing them or texting them on LinkedIn. And I think after a few hundred messages to different people, we found a few which were interested. And this one car manufacturer then called us, even like, hey, come to our place in Germany and let's have a talk.
And did you meet them in person to figure?
Yes.
Oh wow. Okay.
we literally took the car. We went over and we met them in person, and then they were super excited. So they were already talking about the scope of the project. And then when we walked out of the meeting with them, we were not sure whether we actually closed the first deal or not. It's like, the first couple of times it's very you're not sure whether you actually did it or not, but it was very exciting in the end.
So was there a lot of paperwork you had to fill out before showing up, or did you just show up and get a conversation to chat with one of their executives?
No, usually there's we had to sign the NDA.
Okay.
So these things, but otherwise not too much. And then with all larger enterprises, you do the whole onboarding process. You get listed as a how do you call this, as a distributor essentially, and you go through the procurement process, IT review process now. But back then we were even aiming at just POCs, so it was much easier for us.
What were some of the things that you learned in the process of those early conversations, not just with this one car manufacturer, but call it the batch of early first 10 customers?
It was a very big validation of the problem, because initially it was just a personal problem. And then we talked to lots of peers from industry and academia. And the ones from academia said, why would you waste your time even focusing on that? It's not a problem at all. We just have good data sets already, and we already have labels. It's not a big problem to label the data. And it was like 2-3 years ago, right? When there wasn't a shift towards more data-centric AI, which is now happening. So everyone was focusing on training the models, having more compute power available. But back then we already thought about, hey, if you optimize the data a bit, we can get much more return than optimizing the model. And there were a few really early adopter companies, and we figured out that they already faced the problem and had to build their own kind of Lightly in-house. And we started focusing more on these companies.
So once you got a chance to talk to these people and discover their need, how did you know how to apply AI to reduce the set of data that needs to be analyzed for meaningful results? Like, how do you use AI to determine which 1% is the best 1% to work with?
Yes, so it's a combination of algorithms we provide to the users. So for example, we can look for diversity within a data set. So we can look for similar images. If you have lots of images which are very similar, there might be not a lot of value in labeling all of them. If you have a dog and cat classifier, for example, you want to have diverse breeds of dogs. You don't want to have just one breed in the data set. And we kind of optimized on algorithms to support this selection. And then there's also an input from the user, which is usually an ML engineer and who's also a domain expert. The person who has a clear idea of what kind of problem they want to tackle and what kind of output they would like to get by using Lightly.
And when you first started, how long did it take you to build the first version that had at least some deliverable output that you can share with the client?
So I think the experiments were maybe 3 to 6 months just to make sure that it actually works, the benchmarks. And then the whole Dockerization, the first prototype was maybe a month. It was a few sleepless nights, just trying to wrap everything and make sure it works. And then there was continuous improvement on the way.
How did you, how'd you know to do, how did you know how to pursue this path in the first place if you knew that other companies already had? So like once you heard that other companies had their own version of Lightly in-house, what made you want to dive further versus realizing that there might be the problem might be too wide to be solved? Because the set of all data is a relatively, I guess by definition, very broad.
Yes. So the fun thing was they had very, very simple versions of Lightly.
Okay, I see.
Companies would just write very simple algorithms, like in if you work with videos, they would just pick 1 frame per second instead of 30 and use this to subsample the data. But the algorithms were not performing very well. And we just also know that, I mean, I'm also an engineer, data curation is not sexy. You don't want to do that. Actually, if you talk to any ML engineer, they don't want to spend any moment with it. So any solution making it more efficient for them and taking away the pain is highly appreciated. And ML engineers are still very expensive, or even getting more expensive, especially in the Bay Area. So you don't want to have these people just focusing on building their own UI and algorithms. You want to have them focusing on actually improving the models.
So in terms of types of data, you mentioned images before. You've also mentioned videos now, and I guess you subsample down to images. Are you primarily working with visual data?
Yes. So for now, we focus on vision data, images, videos. You can also work with LiDAR or any other 2D, 3D sensors. And the reason why we work with images is also, on one hand, my background in computer vision. On the other hand, it's also that we built internally a framework for working with computer vision. It uses self-supervised learning. Maybe you heard about BERT or from Google or GPT from OpenAI.
Yeah.
They also use self-supervised learning, but for NLP, like natural language processing. And we built our own framework for computer vision. Because there was, just last year, there was a pretty big breakthrough in the field. And we open sourced it. And this gave us a lot of credibility in the space. And we use this framework to help companies understand data before they label it. And then run our algorithms on this unlabeled data to pick what to label.
Can you elaborate on what that breakthrough was?
Yes. So in research, basically, it started maybe 2017, 18 in vision, but didn't get a lot of attention because the models were not very good. So we self-supervised learning or unsupervised learning was always performing worse than supervised learning.
Right.
And then last year, there were very simple methods. One was from actually Geoffrey Hinton, who was also one of the Turing Award winners. the SimCLR, which is a very simple framework for contrastive learning. And it's not only very simple to use, it also resulted in very high accuracy of the models. And it was kind of what BERT did maybe to NLP, to the whole field. It sparked a new interest, and now all the top AI labs are outperforming each other every other month. And we're seeing that just using self-supervised learning on unlabeled data can yield higher results than just using supervised learning, because we have so much more unlabeled data available.
Yeah. Sorry, did you say contrastive learning earlier?
Yes.
What is that?
It's a very interesting concept, actually. In contrastive learning, you take an image and then you perform augmentations on it. So, for example, you change a bit the color or you do a random cropping. And what we do is basically we take an image and we create two augmentations of this one image. So you have maybe a picture of a dog, and then you have just one part of the dog in one augmentation and the other part of the dog in the other augmentation, maybe some color changes between each other as well. And then you train a model to pick the two corresponding images out of all the images in a whole batch, which came from the same original image. So basically you try to solve this puzzle game of which augmentations are connected to each other. And by learning this, to solve this proxy task, the model actually learns pretty good representations. So it has to learn like, hey, a part of a dog and the other part of a dog belongs together to the concept of a dog, or similar things.
How much of your academia experience do you feel like was necessary to be where you are today?
I think actually in the ML space, especially if you're working on these fields where we're active in, it's pretty important to still be up to date with also the publications and everything. So we have weekly paper sessions. You need to be able to read papers and process like what's going on there, even replicate, and also figure out when something doesn't really make a lot of sense, one of the concepts. And I think this helps us a lot also to stay a bit ahead of the whole field.
Do you find that this constant like game of chasing the latest and greatest in terms of research as well as general knowledge makes it hard to hire in the AI space?
It for sure makes it harder in the long term. I think in the short term, if you're working in a sexy field, I mean, we do self-supervised learning, which is getting more and more popular now every year. And we have an open source framework that helps a lot, right? And we are still very close to academia. I think actually it's super important to get these competitive people and to stay ahead, because this field, it's maybe one of the fastest developing fields still. There's so much money flowing into research. There's so much stuff still going on. I think people are talking about the research is saturating. We don't have big breakthroughs, but I think in terms of what's happening in academia, it's pretty crazy. And there's really a lot of resources going in there.
So if someone wants to get into the AI field, what would you have them, like, what would you recommend that they like study so that they can be well prepared?
I would actually focus on the general areas of math, statistics, super important. I think, and software engineering. What I saw now recently is that there are some people, they really focus on this machine learning or AI field without having knowledge of how to actually write software. This makes it pretty complicated in the end to run sustainable experiments and make reproducible code in the end.
What led you to start developing an interest in AI?
That's a good question. I think after my bachelor's, I often participated in hackathons, these coding competitions. And when I participated in one of them, friends of mine started using machine learning algorithms to tackle a problem. And I was just very fascinated by the idea. Before that, I never heard about it. And basically just this switch from I write software to I teach a machine to do certain things for me was just mind-blowing. It was one of these moments where in the evening when you go to sleep, you're just in the bed and you're like dreaming about what you could do with these methods, with these capabilities. So I was very blind then. I just thought you could do everything with ML. So why not use ML for everything? And I wanted to learn more. So I focused in my master's really on machine learning and computer vision. And basically in the beginning, it was a bit hard to realize it's not that easy. We're not that far yet, but still I was pretty fascinated by the idea and capabilities and research direction.
Well, that's how research works in general, right? Like I feel like the whole point of technology is there. It's effectively all things that don't perfectly work yet, and every bit of time moves the boundary a little bit further. So at what point did you want to take your interest in AI as a practitioner turn into a desire to build an AI company?
So for me, there was one kind of point of deciding between a PhD and going into industry.
Yeah.
And I saw like there were 2-3 things which made me go to industry. One was I felt like going into academia and staying there, committing for 4 years on a research topic might be too hard for me because the field is evolving so quickly. I want to be very flexible and look at new areas which are interesting. And the second thing is I'm really a fan of solving problems and building products. So I just wanted to build something, helping others and also helping the whole field move forward. And I felt like going into industry and building a company in that space might be the best option.
And how'd you find a team to start that with? Like, it's not just you. You have at least a co-founder, and I'm assuming other people as well.
Yes. So my co-founder was basically the only one in the beginning believing in it. Even my wife was very skeptical about this field. And even friends at tech companies were like, as I mentioned before, right? Usually the big companies had so much money, they didn't have to worry too much about that. Or especially they had other teams working on this stuff. And I was still like, hey, we should look into that field a bit more. And then my co-founder, he basically, maybe he was a bit naive in the beginning, didn't know what is joining, but we actually figured out really just with an MVP, we were able to monetize it and get interest. And as soon as we know that basically it makes sense to build something there, we were looking for a little bit of funding and then also hired our first engineers.
How difficult was that process of getting funding?
It was very difficult because we raised a small angel or pre-seed round just at the beginning of COVID.
Timing.
So for us it was really brutal, but it worked out. So we were living for a while, even with the first employee, on a month-to-month basis, and we were like every month debating on what actions could we take to extend our runway. But in the end, we managed to get a bit money and then continue working and also close some deals.
How many deals do you feel like you need to close on a I don't know, call it a yearly basis to like help sustain growth for like AI companies in general, or maybe just your company specific? Are these like mega large deals that you only need a few of them, or do you need a lot of small deals? Like, what is the structure?
It's also really still something we're figuring out.
Okay.
What's the best strategy? There is this whole area of startups and especially scale-ups which also use ML, and they have funding and they're moving very fast. So closing them is much quicker than focusing on enterprise customers.
Right.
Enterprise customers have a very long sales cycle, but maybe they give you more money in return. So for us, we're currently focusing a bit on both, because we already have an on-prem version, which actually not many companies in the AI field have. But it's probably necessary, especially if you work with the raw data, because you're not going to move around petabytes of images.
So what do you feel like is still on the table in terms of like work that remains to be done in the domain of AI, both in, let's focus primarily on visual data. Like, what do you feel like most companies aren't yet doing?
Going into production and actually have systems interacting with users. I think we're just in the very early days, and I saw some numbers that maybe 5% of the companies are actually using ML right now. And out of these 5%, most are still doing R&D. So, and the real challenges are actually not just building the first prototype, but actually going into production. For example, in autonomous driving, because the environment is constantly changing. It's not that you build the car once, you build the software once, and then it runs for the next 10 years. And we have new vehicles going on the street. I always make the joke that if the Tesla Cybertruck for the first time drives around, it looks so different than any other car that some AI systems actually might get confused, right?
It's true.
And we need to update them and feed them with new data. Or as soon as we have hoverboards or whatever, or the cities look very different, we need to update the systems. And I think some companies are still underestimating that. So this transition to production, and then it's going much more similar to software engineering, where you have continuous update cycles. You ship new software maybe on a weekly basis, some companies even daily. And I think we will do something similar with machine learning, where you update the model very frequently because you have new data coming back.
What do you think are some of the top friction points that prevent companies from having a more production-ready workflow?
So one of the challenges is what we're focusing on ourselves. There's just so much data. If you think every new car on the street would create more data, and you wouldn't be able just to process all of it. So you have to boil it down to what's the essential subset we actually going to use to label and then retrain our system. This for sure is one part. But then there are also areas of like monitoring and getting this feedback loop in a live system. How to react if the robot, car, or whatever sensor you have sees something it has never seen before. Because the behavior might be very unexpected. And the third area is probably going in this sort of online learning fashion. You know, we humans, we adapt on the fly. It's not that someone has to teach us to react to something new. And we are not doing that at all in machine learning. We have very static models at the moment.
Makes me wonder if someone's working on a startup that works on that problem, like specifically of just making data more like real time and making all the updates happen a lot more frequent.
Yes. And I think that's going to be pretty exciting, right? If you have evolving systems, it might sound very dangerous and people might be very skeptical, but I'm pretty sure that it will be hard to get along without something like that. Because we humans are also not updated all together once a year. we're like
it'd be kind of scary if we did.
Yes, actually, it would be weird.
That said, maybe isn't that scary of a problem? Because I was thinking about this past year during COVID, one of the scariest things about COVID is, in my personal opinion, the misinformation. There are so many people out there that have some call it conspiracy theories, let's call them like I don't know, false sources of information, or just were misinformed, or they read some tagline on social media and they didn't like do the due diligence. Maybe we need to move to a world where people are given a centralized source of updates.
Yes, I was also joking that we should have done the vaccination more or less simultaneously across the globe. Because then you know, like if you would vaccinate everyone in a very short time period,
right,
you wouldn't have the waves jumping around over the whole globe. Because now, I don't know, like one country is vaccinating, then the virus just goes along, and then mutates and so on, and just takes a long time.
There's a lot of countries out there who are still struggling to get the logistics done for like distribution at scale, and I think it makes you wonder, like, oh, there's gonna be so many more variants. It's one of the things I love about software, right? Like you can write software, can deploy it generally immediately, like unless you're in a very, very large team, and like all of a sudden everywhere across the world, all the servers running the latest version and all the features are available. Whereas, man, vaccines, even you have to like deal with all the contracts, the legal, the shipment, all the skepticism, and then you have to deal with the adoption, right? Adoption is incredibly difficult for people who have a predisposition against vaccines for whatever reason.
Exactly. I also feel like maybe COVID showed us how fragile or not developed enough we are. Because we are developed in a sense that we can commute, we have planes, right? We can move very quickly from one place to the other, but this maybe more hurt us in the end than it helped us to prevent the whole outbreak. And it was just interesting, you know, like sometimes to see that there's still so much ahead of us.
I look forward to that point, call it like 5, 10, maybe even 25 years down the line, where all the historians are studying this section of history and figuring like, what do we learn as a society from this era? And it'll be interesting to see what people put in the books.
Yeah. And maybe, or I hope not, but maybe people will forget about it and it will happen again. I would be so human.
The other extreme that we can go down is I joke with my friends, like, oh, we're gonna have to get one vaccine every month for each different variant all the time. So like, oh, it's time for it's almost October in like a week. So it's like, it's time for our October vaccine. 1 month later that you get your November vaccine. It's like, oh dang, that'd be so awful in terms of logistics. And I don't mind getting shots if I need to, but man, would it be awful if there were like 12 vaccines you have to get every year for all potential different variants of every disease.
Yes, yes. I'm so curious, like how it would look like in 2-3 years when you look back.
Yeah.
Will it be actually ending in 2-3 years, or will that just be we'll just enter another phase?
I think it's impossible to go back to where we used to be. For example, one of the things we talked about before the show is just the nature of remote work. One of the things I mentioned was like the cost of living between different parts of the world is so significant. Like a person who is a remote employee, which arguably a lot of tech workers are, be it a product manager, a software engineer, etc., really could work from anywhere that had an internet connection and like just a laptop. And it makes you really wonder, like, is there value in staying in Silicon Valley? Is there value in being one of these like tech hubs? Probably for some, but for many, like it just doesn't justify the cost of moving. And there's also plenty of talent out there where people just like love their hometowns or they love their home countries and they just don't want to move, but they have the immense capacity to contribute significantly to this field.
Yes, I think it's really interesting. I had now 2 experiences just recently. One was we were part of Y Combinator, like the last batch, and we also did fundraising in the end. So we had lots of calls with investors, and it was all remote. It actually worked very well. And some other founders told us that actually fundraising with COVID is easier because you can just book calls all the time. You don't have to commute from one place to the other, and you're just like in a super high efficiency mode. And even investors seem to like it because it's also easier for them. So this is like great. But the other thing I had is last week I was at a conference about autonomous driving, and it was pretty cool to see actually people in person again at a conference. It's also it felt a bit weird in the beginning because it's something I think I've not been at the conference physically for 2 years now. But it was pretty cool, talk to people, have these chats between the sessions, just seeing something on a slide, and you didn't sign up for this talk, but you just go there because it sounds interesting. The slide looks interesting. Let's have a look. All this spontaneous stuff, I would never do. If I have online conferences, I really have a hard time.
I tried going to an online conference last year. It's kind of chaotic, where like it's kind of more of a like information download model versus a social model, and I think a good chunk of the value is primarily the social component, where you meet people, you bounce ideas back and forth. Whereas it's a little harder to do digitally because there's no digital equivalent to serendipity.
No.
I would love to ask you, what is your experience in Y Combinator like? What are some things you learned? What are some things you take away?
It was actually pretty awesome, especially for us as a European company. It was so. First of all, the whole mindset change of everything, thinking really big, thinking about how you can build something very fast. I think advice you really kind of try to optimize for how can you solve a problem for a company or for a customer, and how can you do this as fast as possible. So they give us a lot of freedom. It was not like a full day workshop every day. It was really, they even told us like just focus on product and customers. And then having all these other startups in your batch just doing the same and having these exchanges all the time where everyone helps each other and we push each other. It was pretty cool experience.
Could you remind me, you said the last batch, right? The spring batch? Is that right?
Summer 21.
Summer, okay, sounds good. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been only a few months since then.
Yes, actually we had demo day end of August.
Oh,
and,
okay.
Was also remote. But it's also big now. 400 startups almost.
I was gonna say, one of the things I appreciate about like remote world is the fact that like these demo days make it like, if there's a remote demo day, which some organizations do, it's kind of nice to be able to join from anywhere in the world without having to like book a flight ticket or having to pay for some sign up like fee or whatever. I actually started this podcast only like I think half a year ago during COVID, and I think one of the things that got me to start it was the fact like, well, I want to meet people, but I can't meet people because it's not necessarily convenient or safe at the time based on what we knew to go out into the world and like go from like region to region, meet a bunch of entrepreneurs and like just pick their brains. Like you're in Zurich, which is like at least thousands of miles away from where I'm at. Like the chances we would have met in person, pretty slim, but thanks to COVID, it's a little more, it's quite accessible.
Yes, COVID and technology.
COVID and technology. Or the technology was always there. It's just the COVID made the culture more acceptable to like spend time digitally. Yeah.
Yes. How many Zoom calls did you have without the video turned on recently compared to before COVID?
Oh, shoot. Actually, yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times it was probably like 2/3 to 3/4 of the time I had a video, but post-COVID, it's like 97% where the only time is like technical bugs or like their laptops, like their camera, like literally just broke or whatever. Yeah.
I think these kind of things really changed, and we barely noticed them. But it's really cool that like also now after COVID, probably we will always have It's not very normal to have a video call with camera turned on and everything.
One of the things I look forward to is now that all these older industries that haven't changed in a while are seeing a compelling reason to change. I hope there isn't another pandemic around the corner, but for a lot of companies, they're realizing like, oh, we should digitize everything, so we don't need to have access. We don't have a heavy reliance on physical offices, and a lot of industries like I don't know, like industrial, commercial, healthcare, etc., are realizing, oh, like there's significant value in digitizing all of our experiences.
Yes, totally. I mean, we live basically in the cloud, so for us, there was barely a change, was just not seeing each other. But we know a bunch of companies, they didn't have any policy in place to allow people to work from home and to have access to their data doing machine learning. And so we had a bunch of companies we worked with. They had people like for 1 month not being able to work just because of these policies, because they were not fast enough to adopt.
Yeah.
It was pretty sad.
That's so inefficient.
I think, yes, it's super inefficient, but they figured it out in the end, right? But it's very corporate in the end.
Yeah. How do you keep up with other startups that are also working on the AI space? Like, do you know how they're doing?
Yes, I think actually the space is pretty growing actually. So it works pretty well, and people are very open-minded. So like even companies working in similar on similar topics would just exchange all the time. There's this whole open source field which is very strong in machine learning. I would say it's basically this field is the strongest one built on top of machine learning. Like all these frameworks, TensorFlow, PyTorch, Keras, whatever, all are open source. Most academic research is open source. So it's a very collaborative field actually.
What resources do you usually go to discover all these open source tools and like the tools of your trade?
Twitter, Reddit, and Hacker News, and like just recommendations from friends.
Okay. So I have one last question I'd like to ask you, and like, what's something you've been learning this past year that you wish you knew multiple years ago, either personally or as an entrepreneur?
I think it's the balance you need in life between working and also not relaxing, but more like giving yourself some time to breathe and think. And I think there were lots of times where I was very just focused on work, and I forgot a lot of stuff around me. And then you develop some weird behavior. You start being too much into work. You start drinking even more coffee because you try to compensate for being tired and everything. And it just continues. And then you start getting more moody, angry, and you meet less with people, and you kind of go down this circle. And I think in the end, it's super important to have these not work times. I just this month started again doing lots of sports. Finally, I think after 1.5 years not being able to go to the gym, and I just love it. It gives me again this freshness and also kind of additional motivation, right? You do something just besides work. And I know so many people, during COVID, they had nothing. They were not meeting anyone because there was not too much to do, right? In the beginning, everyone was having Zoom calls. We had like Zoom calls with every friend, but after a few weeks, it stopped. It's just weird to have Zoom calls with all your friends all the time.
Very different cultural shift. Well,
Yes.
Thanks for your time. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I just want to give you the floor now for all the people who are watching this episode who want to follow you personally in your journey or your company's journey. What's the best way for them to do so?
Check out our open source framework. It's Lightly on GitHub. You can start it. You can even contribute to it, or follow us on Twitter, Lightly.ai, or my handle, Susmelj. And happy to talk to you if you have any questions or anything around research or what we do. I'm super excited.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for your time, Igor.
Thank you, David. It was great having this conversation with you.